In the year 489, a shepherd set fire to his grazing land in the Cantabrian Highlands. It was the kind of thing shepherds had done for centuries. Controlled burns to clear dead brush, coax new grass from the soil. Nothing worth recording, nothing a historian would remember. But this fire didn't stay where it was told. The wind shifted, an Atlantic gale screaming east through the Nervion Gorge, and within an hour, the flames had jumped 3 ridgelines and poured downhill into a valley that hadn't burned in living memory. The sacred oak grove of Gauterix. The place where every Visigothic king since the founding had knelt on granite to receive the crown. Oaks older than the kingdom itself, bark scarred with runic carvings that recorded 200 years of consecrated names. Gone, all of it, turned to white ash and blackened stumps before nightfall. The shepherd's name was Gavrus. He was 31 years old, owned 43 sheep, and had never once set foot inside a city. He couldn't read Latin, he couldn't read Gothic, he had no interest in politics, no grievance against the crown, and no ambition beyond keeping his flock alive through another winter on the ridge above the gorge. And he would bring down a king. Gavrus had worked the Nervion Ridge since he was old enough to carry a crook. His father before him, his grandfather before that. The Highlands were a hard country. Wind so constant it hummed through the limestone like a struck bell. Winters that froze the moss on the south-facing rocks. But Gavrus didn't mind the cold. He minded the fire. Every spring, the dead brush piled thick across the grazing paths. If you didn't burn it, the sheep couldn't reach the new grass. If you burned it wrong, well, every Highland shepherd knew the stories.
Wind's wrong today. Should wait. Should wait.
He said it to himself, standing on the ridgeline with a pitch torch in one hand and his crook braced against the gale. The sky was iron grey, clouds racing east so fast they seemed to drag the hilltops with them. Every instinct told him to come back tomorrow. But his flock was hungry now. The ewes were lambing, and the grazing below the ridge was buried under a season's worth of dead bracken.
Time has come.
One more day without fresh grass meant dead lambs. Dead lambs meant a winter he couldn't survive. He lit the torch, touched it to the brush line. The fire caught, quick, eager, crackling through the dry stalks exactly the way it was supposed to. For 10 minutes, everything went according to plan. Then the wind changed. It didn't just shift, it reversed. A gust came howling up the gorge from the southeast, something Gavrus had never felt in 31 years on that ridge. The firewall pivoted like a door swinging open and raced downhill, away from the grazing paths, away from the ridge, down toward the valley he'd never had reason to burn. By the time Gavrus scrambled down the slope, the sacred oak grove of Gauterix was already screaming. That's the only word for what ancient oaks sound like when they burn. A deep, groaning scream as the sap boils inside the trunk and the bark splits open in jagged wounds of orange light. He stood at the tree line and watched the coronation grove of the Visigothic kings turn to charcoal. The granite altar at the center cracked down the middle from the heat. The runic carvings blackened, blistered, and peeled away like dead skin.
What have I done? What have I done?
What he'd done, though he didn't know it yet, was expose something the fire's heat had split open beneath the altar stone. A sealed vault cut into the bedrock, mortared shut with Roman cement that had held for nearly a century. Gavrus found it at dawn. The grove was still smoking, grey wisps curling from the stumps like the ghosts of the trees they'd been. He'd come back to assess the damage, to understand how bad it was, how much trouble he was facing. And there, where the altar had cracked apart and fallen inward, a rectangular darkness in the earth, steps leading down. He should have walked away. Any reasonable person would have. A sealed vault beneath a sacred site, that was the business of kings and priests, not shepherds. But Gavrus had already destroyed the grove. Whatever punishment was coming, it was coming regardless. And something in that dark opening pulled at him. The way a wound pulls your fingers toward it, the need to know how deep it goes. He descended 7 steps. The vault was small, barely the size of a sheep pen, but stacked against the far wall, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept them dry for generations, were clay tablets, dozens of them, covered in Gothic script. Gavrus couldn't read a single word, but he recognized the royal seal pressed into each tablet, the eagle and the flame, the mark of the Visigothic crown. He'd seen it stamped on tax notices his entire life, and pressed beside that royal seal on every single tablet, a second mark. A mark Gavrus had never seen on any official document. The brand of a Roman slave house.
I can't read it. We'll leave these here.
It took 11 days for word of the burned grove to reach Toledo. It took 14 for the content of those tablets to follow, and in those 14 days, the entire political architecture of the Visigothic Kingdom began to shift beneath King Alaric's feet like a floor rotting from underneath, invisible until the moment it gives way. Gavrus didn't carry the news himself. He brought the tablets to Valdara, the Highland herbalist who'd been his mother's closest friend. Valdara was 63 years old, sharp as a blade, and one of the few people in the Cantabrian Highlands who could read both Latin and Gothic. She read the tablets by firelight in her stone cottage, while Gavrus sat across the hearth, watching her face change.
Do you know what these are, boy? Do you have any idea what you've pulled out of the ground?
Valdara set the tablet down. Her hands were shaking, and Gavrus had never seen Valdara's hands shake. Not when she set broken bones, not when she pulled breech lambs, not once in 30 years.
The council has decided there will be no retreat. We stand here until the last candle goes out.
I don't understand.
What do you say?
The implications were immediate and absolute. Visigothic law was inflexible on this point. The crown passed through blood, only through blood. A king without the bloodline of the founding dynasty wasn't a king at all. He was a usurper. And the punishment for usurpation under the old laws was death by the sword on the coronation stone. The same coronation stone that Gavrus's fire had just cracked in half. Valdara told Gavrus to hide the tablets and say nothing. She told him the fire was punishment enough, that the crown would fine him, maybe take his flock, but he'd survive. She told him to let this secret die where it had been buried.
You don't understand what happens when you pull the foundation out from under a kingdom. Everyone falls. Not just the king, everyone.
And Gavrus nearly listened. For 3 days he buried the tablets behind his sheep shelter and tried to pretend he'd never found them. He went back to his flock. He watched the lambs nurse. He told himself it wasn't his problem. But the fire had already spoken for him. The destruction of the sacred grove was news across the kingdom within a week. Priests called it an omen. Peasants whispered that the gods were angry. And in Toledo, a woman named Sunna, whose father had been executed 7 years earlier for questioning Alaric's parentage, heard about the vault beneath the altar and sent riders north before the ashes were cold. Sunna's agents found Gavrus on the ridge, still trying to convince himself that silence was the same as peace.
You have something that belongs to the truth, Shepherd. I'm here to make sure it gets there.
Before me, peasant. I bear the truth you refuse to hear, Alaric. Silence him, brother. I have nothing left to lose.
The road to Toledo took 9 days on foot. Gavrus walked it, carrying the tablets in a goatskin satchel, flanked by Sunna's guards, feeling every step take him further from the only life he understood. The lowlands smelled different. Wet earth, cattle dung, wood smoke from villages packed too close together. The cities smelled worse. Toletum hit him like a wall. Roman colonnades rising from muddy streets. Germanic timber halls bolted onto marble facades. Torchlight bouncing off looted mosaics in the palace courtyard. The throne room smelled of pine resin and iron, and something else. Something Gavrus couldn't name, but recognized instinctively. Fear. Power held too tightly always smells like fear. King Alaric the Resplendent received Gavrus in a private chamber. No court, no witnesses, just the king, his chief counselor Theodahad, and a shepherd from the highlands who was gripping his crook like a weapon. And Alaric made his offer. Gavrus said nothing. He stared at the mosaic floor beneath his feet. A Roman hunting scene, dogs chasing a stag into a river.
I have made my choice. Let the consequences come. The decision is made.
And here is where the crown historian must pause, because the record shows that Gavrus considered it. For 2 full days, he sat in a guest chamber in the Palace of Toledo, staring at a satchel full of clay tablets, weighing a shepherd's life of cold and hunger against 300 gold pieces and a warm estate. He was still weighing it when a palace messenger brought word that changed everything. Alaric's soldiers had been dispatched to the Cantabrian highlands. Their orders: burn the shepherd's cottage, scatter his flock, and arrest anyone who'd seen the tablets. Valdara was still there. Gavrus didn't sleep the night he learned about the soldiers. He sat in the dark of his guest chamber in Toledo, turning a decision over and over the way a man turns a blade, checking for weakness in the steel. Every argument for silence had collapsed. Alaric wasn't offering a trade. He was buying time to destroy the evidence and everyone connected to it. The 300 solidi weren't a reward. They were a funeral payment made in advance.
We will guide you to a just path, my king.
By dawn, Gavrus had made his choice. He sent word to Sunna, and Sunna, who had spent 7 years building a network of nobles, priests and soldiers who suspected what she couldn't prove, moved with the speed of someone who'd been waiting her entire adult life for this moment. Within 48 hours, she'd arranged what no commoner had ever achieved in Visigothic history: a public audience in the Basilica of the Crowned Flame, with the full council of nobles, the Bishop of Toletum, and the king himself compelled to attend under the ancient rite of petition by grievance. Alaric couldn't refuse. The petition was older than the dynasty. Refusing it would have been an admission of guilt so obvious that even his most loyal supporters would have faltered. The Basilica of the Crowned Flame had stood for 140 years. Its vaulted ceiling was blackened by the smoke of every coronation, every royal funeral, every oath of fealty sworn since the founding. A single shaft of light fell through an oculus in the dome, landing on the anointing stone at noon, the exact hour the petition was scheduled to begin. Gavrus entered through the western doors. A shepherd in rough-spun wool, carrying a goatskin satchel, walking the same nave that kings had walked. The nobles on the stone benches stared at him the way wolves watch something unfamiliar. Not afraid, not yet, just assessing. Alaric sat on a gilded chair beneath the apse. His crown caught the shaft of light from the oculus. Gold and garnet, the eagle and the flame worked into the band. Theodahad stood at his right hand, Bishop Phronimius at his left. The king's expression was perfectly composed. Gavrus reached the anointing stone. He set the satchel down, and he spoke, not to the king, not to the nobles, but to Theodahad. Because Gavrus still couldn't read, and the law required that the tablets be read by someone of noble rank.
Let the sacred law be broken. You steal in the holy house.
The basilica went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a pause, the crushing silence of 300 people holding their breath at once. Theodahad looked at Alaric. Alaric looked at Theodahad. And in that exchange, that fraction of a second, Gavrus saw something pass between them that told him everything.
Shepherd is a tool of traitors, and any man...
The chief counselor's face went through 3 expressions in the time it takes a heart to beat twice. Loyalty, grief, and then something harder. Something that looked like a man setting down a burden he'd carried so long he'd forgotten he was carrying it. He read them, every word, in a voice that carried to the back walls of the basilica and echoed off the blackened ceiling. Birth records, correspondence between the old queen and a Roman household, payments to midwives, instructions for the falsification of lineage documents. The entire architecture of a deception that had held for nearly 40 years, dismantled in 12 minutes of a man's steady, breaking voice.
Theodahad, stop. I command you to stop.
Theodahad didn't stop. He read the final tablet, the one that bore the slave brand of the House of Cassus beside the royal seal, and set it on the anointing stone, where the light from the oculus fell across it like an accusation. And then King Alaric the Resplendent did something that hadn't been done inside the Basilica of the Crowned Flame in 140 years of sacred law. He drew his sword. The sound of steel clearing a scabbard in a consecrated space hit that basilica like a thunderclap. Nobles surged to their feet. Bishop Phronimius stumbled backward, his ceremonial staff clattering against the stone floor. Guards at the doors didn't know whether to advance or retreat. Their king had just violated the most sacred prohibition in Visigothic law. No blade drawn in the crowned flame, ever. Not in war, not in self-defense, not even by a king. He was looking at Gavrus when he said it. And Gavrus, a man who'd never held a weapon more dangerous than a shepherd's knife, looked back at him without flinching. Not because he was brave, because he'd already been more afraid than this. He'd been afraid on the ridge when the fire turned. He'd been afraid in the vault beneath the altar. He'd been afraid every night in Toledo, weighing gold against truth. This was just a man with a sword. And Gavrus had spent his whole life dealing with things that wanted to kill his sheep.
The evidence is undeniable.
Bishop Phronimius spoke. One sentence, barely above a whisper, but every person in that basilica heard it.
The king has drawn blood steel in the house of God. By the law of Gauterix, the crown is forfeit.
The events that followed moved with the speed of an avalanche, slow at the top, then all at once, then nothing but the sound of settling debris. Alaric didn't surrender the sword. He held it for 11 more seconds. Theodahad would later testify to the count, while the basilica emptied around him. Nobles, guards, even his own household staff. They flowed out through the western doors like water finding the lowest ground, leaving the king standing alone in the shaft of light with a naked blade and a crown that no longer meant anything.
The evidence is conclusive. Justice demands the truth.
The law was unambiguous. Drawing a weapon in the crowned flame was the one transgression the Visigothic constitution could not forgive. It predated Christianity, predated the kingdom itself, a prohibition so old its origins were lost in the tribal memory of the Goths. The crown was forfeit, not by vote, not by trial, by the act itself. Theodahad was the one who went back in. He found Alaric sitting on the anointing stone, the sword across his knees, the crown still on his head. The shaft of light had moved past noon. The basilica was dim now, just torches and shadows and the smell of old smoke. Alaric didn't answer immediately. He sat with the weight of 40 years of deception pressing down on him, and for a moment, just a moment, Theodahad saw something flicker across the king's face that looked almost like relief.
I was a good king, Theodahad. Say what you want about the blood, but I was a good king.
And the terrible thing, the thing that would haunt the historians who came after, was that he wasn't entirely wrong. Alaric had built roads, settled disputes with the Franks, reformed the tax system, fed his people through 3 famines. The kingdom under his reign had been more stable, more prosperous than under any of the legitimate kings who preceded him. But power built on a lie requires more lies to sustain it, and each lie demanded a darker compromise. The midwife who delivered him, silenced. The Roman household that kept the records, scattered. Sunna's father, who'd asked one question too many, executed on a false charge of treason. The lie didn't just corrupt Alaric, it consumed him, one piece of his humanity at a time, until the good king and the tyrant were so tangled together you couldn't separate them without killing both. That's what power does when its foundation is rotten. It doesn't matter how fine the structure, the rot travels upward. The Council of Nobles convened the next morning. Bishop Phronimius presided. Theodahad gave testimony, a full accounting of what he'd known and when he'd known it. He didn't spare himself. He stood before the council with the rigid posture of a man who has decided that the truth, however late, is the only currency left worth spending. Alaric was stripped of his crown, his lands, and his name. The official record would identify him only as the false king, a deliberate erasure, the Visigothic equivalent of never having existed. He was given a choice: exile across the Pyrenees or trial by the old laws. He chose exile. He walked out of Toledo through the eastern gate on a grey morning, wearing the rough-spun tunic of a commoner. No guards, no retinue, no crown. The historians note that he paused at the gate and looked back once. Then he kept walking. He disappeared into Frankish territory and was never heard from again.
Barbarian incursion. The evidence within these scrolls unequivocally supports.
Suna pushed for the council to select a new king from the legitimate bloodline. They found one, a distant cousin, the grandson of a younger son, a man named Gauterix, who had been living as a provincial magistrate and had never expected to sit on anything grander than a municipal bench. The kingdom didn't collapse. The kingdom never collapses the way people expect. Not with a crash, but with a slow, groaning shift as the weight redistributes and new pillars take the load. Gauterix proved capable, not brilliant, but honest. And after Alaric, honest was enough. Gavrus was offered a reward: land, title, gold, the same things Alaric had offered him, but from a hand that didn't tremble when it gave them. He turned it all down.
I propose this path for the new foundation. Let us move forward.
He walked back to the Cantabrian highlands. 9 days on foot, the same road, the same dust. When he reached the Nervion Ridge, he found that Valdara had saved his flock. The soldiers Alaric sent had arrived to find the cottage empty. Valdara had driven the sheep into the high caves 3 days before, reading the danger the same way she read weather. Gavrus found her sitting by his fire pit, feeding the last embers with juniper branches. She didn't ask what happened in Toledo. She already knew. News travels in the highlands, slower than in the capital, but it arrives all the same. The sacred oak grove of Gauterix never grew back. Not fully. But the following spring, in the ashes of the oldest oak, the one that had stood at the center, the one whose rings contained 2 centuries of the kingdom's history, a shoot appeared. Thin, pale, fragile as a promise. The new king, Gauterix, ordered that no one touch it. Let it grow or die on its own terms, he said. Let the land decide. Centuries later, historians would argue about what destroyed Alaric's reign. Was it the shepherd's fire? The tablets? Theodahad's betrayal? Alaric's own sword drawn in the sacred dark of the crowned flame? The answer, as it usually is with fallen crowns, was simpler than any of those. Alaric's reign was destroyed by Alaric, by the first lie told to protect his blood, and every lie required after it. The shepherd didn't bring down the king. The king had been falling for 40 years. Gavrus's fire just burned away the scaffolding that held the illusion upright. And on the Nervion Ridge, the wind still hums through the limestone. The sheep still graze the spring grass that grows from scorched earth. And if you walk the old shepherd's path past the place where the grove once stood, you'll find that single oak, taller now, strong enough to hold a man's weight, not yet strong enough for a crowd.